Here we are with our skirmish conquest debate. Which game mode is better? We have two people representing each side tonight. So, from the skirmish side, the pro skirmish side, saying that it's better than conquest, we have Feller and Star. And then on the pro conquest side, we have MGDKO and Zoo. We'll introduce them in a little bit, but we'll talk about the debate format for now. So, there are going to be 4 rounds of debate where each candidate or panelist, rather, this isn't a election, but each panelist will have 3 minutes to speak for each round, 4 rounds, so a total of 12 minutes. And this order is specified where we'll start with Feller, who is pro skirmish, MG the KO, which is pro conquest, then Star, who's pro skirmish, and then Zoo, who's pro conquest. So we're going to go back and forth. And then at the end of the 4 rounds, the audience will have a chance to ask questions, and we will present those there. So with that being said, let us introduce our panelists. Starting with the pro skirmish side, we have Feller.
Howdy, folks. First Sergeant Feller, fighting 5th Virginia. Thank you for having me, Eagle.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And then our other panelist is Star.
Howdy, folks. Star, Colonel and Commanding Officer, 5th Virginia, CSA 2nd Corps. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Now to our pro conquest side. First, we have MJ the KO.
Howdy, I'm MJ, Brigadier of Walkers in I Corps. I'm on the conquest side.
Thank you. And then our other pro conquest panelist is Zoo.
Hi, I'm Zoo, Florida Regiment Leader. As a Chinaman, I know what it's like to be involved in conquest, so conquest is the way to go.
All right, thank you. So let us begin with the first round opening statements. Feller, you start off. You have 3 minutes. You may begin.
All right, I'm going to try and keep this a little short and sweet here. I'm going to start off by saying I don't really hate Conquest. I think it's really fun whenever both sides know what they're doing and they know how to play the map right. But the devs have really messed it up. It's an amazing concept, really. But really, usually the artillery positions are awful. The artillery crew has to continuously push the cannons to a decent spot, but as soon as they get up there, the unit that they would be shooting at has already fucked off, rendering it useless. That's really it. Like I said, short and sweet.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you. Now, on the pro conquest side, we have MJ the KO. You have 3 minutes for your opening statement. You may begin.
All right. I'm going to start off with a few things that differentiate the game modes substantially from each other, beyond just the very obvious, hey, there's flags that are there now, right, that you have to cap. On Skirmish, Final Push exists. On Conquest, you hit Last Stand. There's a lot of changes in tactics that this means, and it also means that the inherent imbalance of people hitting Final Push versus Last Stand, one person having infinite tickets, while the other having very limited amount, there's a big imbalance there. That Conquest really fixes quite a bit. On Skirmish, the maps are significantly smaller. And you did reference this with Artie. Artie is a lot happier in wide open sightlines or in areas that they can actually hit. On Conquest, the maps are often too big for Artie to work on. There are some exceptions to that. But of course, on Skirmish, there are some exceptions to that as well, right? It really just depends on the wide open sightlines. So it's just map specific, right? On Conquest, you just have big maps. So there's a less of a likelihood for Artie to work. But you can see on the Hagerstown map with Dunker's Church, Artie actually has a job there on Conquest. So it's not just on Skirmish, it's just a map specific there. Another thing is, Skirmish has been the way you play War of Rights since I've been playing. And it came out around 7 years ago, on May 18th, 2017 is when Skirmish came out. Which is like in the very, very early part of this game, whereas Conquest came out very recently, which means it's a lot more fresh for players like myself who've been playing for a really long time. Their larger, newer maps means more engagements in more positions for experienced players without too much of a meta, at least yet. And there's more outplays that are possible as a commander in Conquest because of the larger maps and newer maps. It also leads to more entertaining gameplay, at least for veterans of the game, who aren't necessarily leading, but are feeding information to their leader. Because scouting is a lot more important because the maps are so new and people can come in from angles that you would have never thought of before, right? And that means that your NCOs have more on their plate and lower level officers have a lot more on their plate, just talking to the men, saying, hey, there's things over here, talking to the commander. It really puts a spotlight on really good regiments out there. And when you get all the way down to the recruit level, oftentimes they're just trying to follow orders to the best of their ability. Sitting behind a stone wall hasn't gotten boring like it kind of has for them yet, but it's probably just as engaging for them to be on the move, capping up flags, and rotating to try to fulfill, capping up all those 3 different objectives. I don't think the volunteers and our regiments are raising too much of a stink over either game mode, unless their regiment isn't comfortable at Conquest because it's so new, or Skirmish for whatever reason, right?
All right, thank you. Those
It
are
would-
3 minutes. So you can continue those statements in the next round, but now we'll be moving on to our next person. Star, on the pro skirmish side, you have 3 minutes. You may begin.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and open up with like my first sergeant, I'm going to state that I do enjoy both Conquest and Skirmish mode, and I believe that once we do set a rhythm playing Conquest, and as the game mode is further polished by the dev team, I may start to enjoy playing it more. But as it stands right now, Skirmish is just proven to be the better game mode. We should remember Skirmish is the game mode that kept War Rights alive for just as many years as it's been out. I think 7 years, you just said? And yeah, while it does have its drawbacks, it is the backbone of War Rights as it stands. It's been around long enough that the devs at Campfire have gotten the time they need to test and balance things out. And with a few glaring exceptions as far as maps are concerned, they've done a great job. Conquest, as it currently stands, it's great. While it's great to have another game mode to play and keep things interesting, it is still in need of polishing and perfection from the developmental standpoint. Be it the positioning of the points or how many tickets are drained by the capture of the points and things like that. As for the maps themselves and the tactics there, and I feel the Conquest maps are too large, and it often ends up being a scramble for the center points and therefore majority of the points. And then due to the fact that a lot of these maps are very linear while also being large maps, it becomes way too easy to just hold the 2 points and then just win the game based on that. That paired with how drastic ticket loss becomes when the enemy holds majority, it causes the games to kind of just snowball and end up just ending too quickly. I would like to see the focus of Conquest be turned more towards inflicting casualties on your enemy as opposed to just rushing to and sitting on a point. Skirmish mode is essentially only focused on casualties, meaning if you shoot more accurately and charge more effectively and with better timing and coordination than your enemy, you're much more likely to win. I like having the abilities and the training of the regiments involved having the greatest effect on the outcome of a match as opposed to the constant drain just from holding a point. I believe also that the artillery positioning, like my first sergeant said, it leaves a lot to be desired. They're often awkwardly positioned, not on an elevated point, or even behind a fence or a wall, which just renders them useless. Maybe the addition of cavalry units to pull the guns around could rectify that, but as it stands, artillery on Conquest just isn't any good. Skirmish mode's artillery has had much more thought put into the positioning, often with locations being based on historical accuracy even. That enhanced positioning make the guns much more effective, allowing them to really turn the tide of a battle if used correctly. So really, I believe Conquest, given the attention it needs, could be an incredible game mode, but Skirmish mode's already proven itself to be a great game mode, seeing as it's held up this entire community for years and years.
Right. Thank you. Now to our last person for the opening statements. We have Zoo from the Pro Conquest Guide. You have 3 minutes. You may begin.
Well, I will agree. Skirmish is a very complete game mode, right? It has had the luxury of being basically the de facto War of Rights game style for at least 3 years or so, and it's basically the same configuration it is now on all 3 map packs. But Conquest has not even been around for 6 months, much less a year. I think that much like Skirmish, Conquest needs optimization, refinement, and a whole lot of things to become really what War of Rights wasn't intended to be. This kind of large-scale grasp of basically the Battle of Antietam, right? By connecting a lot of the Skirmish maps together. And honestly, I think issues like bad artillery placement is nothing new to War of Rights. There are plenty of maps and Skirmish modes on any of the map packs that honestly, artillery, useless. Just because of the positioning and where it's at and really just the scope of the Skirmish map, not very good. So to see Conquest maps like that, unsurprising. And all it'll take is for them to edit the placement. Whereas a Skirmish map, it's all historical placement. They're not going to change that ever. Maybe with this new Conquest optimization update that I think is going to come out, they'll make things better. I think given maybe a year or 2 from now, Conquest will be a lot more all-encompassing than Skirmish mode. First, you can customize your regiments. None of you guys have talked about that. That's pretty awesome. They're going to come out with basically the ability to, customize historically what you could wear, and all the positions that come with it, from private to officer, and every rank for each role. And on top of that, the Conquest mode, right? What I find superior about it is that it's more difficult to set into metas. Like, the only metas that are around for Conquest are who can get to the midpoint faster, right? That's probably the biggest one. But maps and Skirmish, they have tactical like location metas, right? Like, everybody knows Nicodemus Hill. CSA wants to win, they need to hold that hill. You lose the hill, you lose the game, right? The Harvest Fairy Graveyard, you know what I mean? You got to hold the stone wall, both ends. Can't lose it. And I could go on forever about all the other maps, but Conquest, it's a lot more difficult because you can actually pretty much attack most objectives from any direction. I would agree that it never really devolves into that. It's usually just fighting over the midpoint, and that the ticket system needs to be more prevalent on victory in who is killing more. Like, what I find in most Skirmish games, you could perform tactically far terribly than the other team, get like 200 more casualties than the enemy, but if you hold the majority of points, you're more likely to win, right? I do think the flag should be less prevalent in terms of victory, but I think it's a step in the right direction for what people want War of Rights to be.
All right.
And ultimately, it's just a great time.
All right. Thank you, Zoo, for your 3 minutes. Now moving on to our second round. Same order as before. On the Pro Skirmish side, we have Fowler. You have 3 minutes. You may begin.
MJ, you said something along the lines of there's more movement than action, or that's what I kind of figured it to sound like. More, you said it's boring sitting in front of a stone wall for half the game, but whenever these new players or new people get into the game and they start moving around, it's more exciting for them, more interactive with them. But people eventually, if they're always running around, they're gonna want to see more action, and that kind of that's an issue with like low population servers, and the map. I know it's already been said a while or a lot, and the map being too big. Um, with low population servers, I mean it really is a hassle to find the enemy, because of again how big the maps are, and sometimes they're just too big, sometimes they are too small. It really is. It's a mix of things, really. And then Zoo, you said that artillery positions on Skirmish also really suck, so it's nothing new to us. But the thing is, for artillery positions on Conquest, it's really the majority of Conquest maps, like the Joe Camp maps and South Mountain maps and shit like that. Those artillery positions absolutely suck. Now, I'm not denying that there are bad artillery positions on Skirmish, but it's not the majority of the time. And that's all I have to say.
All right. Thank you, Fowler. Now we're moving on to MJ. You have 3 minutes. You may begin.
Okay, I'm going to respond a little bit to the Artie thing. I think Zoo is probably going to say something similar, but I think this has gone down to map-specific Artie positions. I think, yes, it is true. Conquest has a lot of maps where Artie is essentially unusable. That's also true for sometimes on Skirmish. You'll have a whole night or multiple weeks in a row where you just won't have a position for Artie. A lot of the Harper's Ferry maps, it's incredibly difficult for Artie to get good shots off. For some of the South Mountain maps, some of them are really, really hard for Artie to actually do its job. It's just map-specific balancing. Sometimes, I think for some maps, there is no way for Artie to be effective. Just you put it anywhere. Other times, I think if you have horse-drawn Artie, like our opposition mentioned, it will help it a lot, just because you can move it around more quickly. But I think it really comes down to map-specific things there, not game mode-specific ones. And that's just something the devs are going to have to balance. In regards to the scramble for the midpoints, I don't know if you were around way back in the day, but Skirmish also had mad dashes for points until the counterattack system was implemented, right? Conquest has counterattack on basically every single point, and it has counterattack even if you have all three. Another thing is, even if you are doing that counterattack, that scramble that happens for the point, it happens when one of the teams hits final push or last stand. They have to scramble to the point, just like we scramble at the start of the game on Conquest. You have to scramble at the end of the game for Skirmish. It's just you're changing the time period there. Yes, it is a mad dash right out of spawn, no reloads, no bayonets on some of those maps, but it's the same thing on Skirmish. It's just at the end, so maybe we don't notice it as much. For low population servers, I absolutely agree. Conquest for, let's say, 75 people on a server, you just can't play it. The maps are too big, and I'm going to agree with my opposition there. Low pop servers, I'm just going to concede that for sure. In regards to snowballing, I think it's true. I think that it should be more casualty focused on Conquest, especially, rather than flag cap focused. I think we can just ask the devs to change the rate at which flags make us lose tickets, and that'll be an easy fix there. It should still be there, but it shouldn't be as significant as it currently is. I think that can just be a small numbers change, and we're good there. As of right now, I think it's pretty close. It just make it a little bit less, and we're perfect. So that's me for my time.
All right. Thank you. Now let's move on to the pro skirmish side. Star, you have 3 minutes. You may begin.
All right. I'll just say I've agreed with a lot of the points from both sides thus far. And I know I signed up to be pro skirmish on this debate, but I really do want Conquest to succeed. Just as it stands right now, just with the mad dash for the center, and I know you say that's a thing in skirmish as well. It is, but it's only after a full round of fighting does that happen. So it just becomes, on Conquest, it's the immediate full rush, and then whoever wins just gets to sit and set up defensive positions, and that's really it. They just get ticked down until the game ends and the inevitable loss for the people who don't hold majority. And that just seems kind of lame, to be quite honest. I like games where it's more intensive on who can be better trained to more effectively shoot your enemy and kill your enemy, as opposed to who can better sit and hold a point. And sure, it can come down to a multitude of different things. Sure, there could be other ideas as far as tactics where you don't necessarily have to attack that point. But it's all just something that needs kind of figured out by the people who are playing. And it's just something that needs time. And Conquest, I want it to be good really bad. And hopefully it will be. And I just think Skirmish, as it stands right now, is the better mode because all the regimental leaders kind of have an idea as to how to play it. So it comes down to much more exciting games where people know what they're doing and they know how to accurately and more effectively combat their enemy, as opposed to just running around in the woods. And that comes down to the leaders. They have to know the map. They have to know what they're doing. And a lot of the folks so far don't really know that yet. So I think Conquest down the line can be great, but I think right now, Skirmish is going to be better.
Thank you. Now, let's move on to Zoo, Pro Conquest. You have 3 minutes. You may begin.
I mean, I still think Conquest is marginally superior to Skirmish, even in its what I would consider a slightly off state or maybe semi-broken state, right? I mean, I don't think the maps are too big. I think that's kind of like the appeal of Conquest, right? It's a combination of maps. Like, you can't combine 2 maps and it not be better than what you had before, right? Kind of ridiculous. I think that's the cool part of it. Like Farmland, you go from Haderstown to Hookers, or Dunter to Haderstown to Hookers to Millers, right? And even Nicodemus Hill is kind of there in the back. And, it's all connected, right? It's just great to see people moving. I think the problem with having a big map is that the consequences of failing is large, because if you fuck an assault up, right, it's going to take you another 10 minutes to get back to the front. And then, all the while, if you're losing, that's tickets down. I think maybe, like I said, it's just all tweaking those issues where maybe increasing the timer, right? Decreasing the penalty and the focus of the flags and the ticket drain. But at the same time, it does provide kind of like, honestly, I think a more adaptive challenge to officers. Like, you see them do different things. And even though you have those kind of set in like maps that lean one way or the other, you still see a capability to turn things around. Like, I played Conquest on framing fence lines the other day at CSA, And because we took our time, we let the enemy take the midpoint. We took our time to set an assault that we knew was going to work rather than try to just rush to the mid. We were able to take it back and hold the sunken lane and framing fence lines for the rest of the game. And, the USA could have done the same thing, but, ultimately poor coordination or, maybe things just didn't go well for them and a bunch of other reasons, right? Like we outnumber them a little bit. It all combines, right? It all snowballs into a loss. And I definitely do see like teams winning by larger margins in Conquest than you do in Skirmish. But at the same time, I feel like that is the price you pay from a game that is supposed to be balanced, right? A game type that's supposed to be more balanced than Skirmish, and also a game type that's newer than Skirmish. Like I could be a new War of Rights leader, come in a War of Rights, make a regiment, and I can basically learn from pretty much any regiment, whether they're good or bad, right? What am I supposed to do on Bolivar Heights Redoubt at CSA or USA, right? But Skirmish is so new, right? I feel like a lot of people don't understand exactly how even the mechanics of Conquest work, much less what to do in certain situations on certain maps. And a lot of it is still being made up as we speak, right? And I don't think that that knowledge is going to be invoked on you or I sitting here in this debate for at least another few months, just because, again, it's just so new and fresh. Like, it just takes time to build up that history. And I think that Skirmish, like, it just has too much of an advantage of having been here for like 3 years plus. You know what I mean? That like you, Star, I, Zoo, MJ, right? Tell you a map, I could tell you a side, you already know what the meta is. It's just that easy.
Your 3 minutes is up. Thank you, Zoo. Okay, so now moving on to our third of the fourth round. Same order as before. Feller, you have 3 minutes. You may begin.
Going off of what you said, Zoo, that Conquest is absolutely new. I agree with that. I feel like it's a Campfire actually has thrown Conquest together. Hell, they don't even have a map, fucking loading. They haven't even made the map for it. Already, like I said, being awful and on different map sets like Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry, and I know I'm just kind of repeating what I said earlier about being too big, but Harper's, it's literally the town of Harper's Ferry on one map, and then I know like the A point is right in Union Spawn, B point's up in Harper's Graveyard, and C point is up in I think it's High Street. No, it's not High Street.
Talking about the
Washington
Rivertown
Street.
map.
I don't know. Rivertown, I guess. But like I said, spawns, they're too close for Rivertown. And because I mean, you're really spawning. It's basically the Battle of Fredericksburg, like the beginning stages of Fredericksburg. You're in the streets. That's all it is. And sometimes you have to go fucking hiking to get to a different spot to be at a advantageous spot. It really is just thrown together.
All right. Thank you. MJ, you have 3 minutes. You may begin.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat a little bit what Zeus said. I like large maps too. I like the fire and maneuver aspect. I like doing the little bit of like Vietnam RP that you get with like Union coming through the woods. You got to shoot them up, or Confederates, whatever. I like that aspect. I also liked Picket Patrol back in the day until it became like camping simulator. I just like that aspect of cutting sight lines, moving quickly, moving along, using your regiment, your rifles to the best of your ability to get your advantage over the enemy, where every kill matters. I really like that aspect. And I think Conquest currently is that iteration. It requires fast reaction time. It requires good knowledge of the maps, and it requires like learning those maps quickly. It requires having good NCOs to tell you, "Hey, I see something over here. I see something over here." It isn't locked in like the meta on a lot of certain skirmish maps. Just like Zoo was saying, you can go to anybody and they'll tell you what to do on X map, right? And you're going to know they're coming from over there, or we're supposed to come from over here. Conquest doesn't have that yet. It's going to develop, I think, over time, but because the maps are large, there's always going to be a wrench that you can throw into things. That large map thing is double-sided, like mentioned with the low pop servers, but I think for the kind of size that we're playing on, like 120 per team, I think it's just better. In regards to having too much movement and not enough, like just sitting there and shooting, or not enough engagement. I think the essence of trying to get really, really good at War of Rights isn't just landing your shots well. It's landing your shots well and making sure they can't return them. And the way you can do that is with fire and maneuver. And that's one of the reasons why I like Conquest so much. Another thing is, in that previous one where you said, hey, it's all around that middle point, in the previous event, same event that he was talking about with Sunken Lane, the map right before then, we were attacked on B. You can see it on Battle Line Network. We were attacked on B in Walker's division, I-Corps. We lost it, and I think it was Florida. They went to C towards the Union spawn. They capped it up. It's that dynamic playstyle. We said, hey, we're losing B. And 5th Florida takes the initiative and like, okay, we have a flag. We're going to go cap C up then. You know, they sent their whole team there. We're going to punish them for that mistake of sending their whole team. And they went up and they decapped C, and the Union had a whole big debacle. I think that event was fairly one-sided. On that first one, I think it was like a 200 casualty difference, and as well as the flag difference too. I like that aspect of where you can use your Steam chat, you can call in your allies, you can say, hey, this is what just happened, and officers using their big brains can make, decisions on the field that'll change the entire outcome of the battle.
All right.
On their own.
Your 3 minutes is up. Thank you. All right. Star, you have 3 minutes. You may begin.
All right, I'm just going to go ahead and say I agree with absolutely everything you just said. I love the fact that on Conquest mode you can use your small units to meld into the forest and then jump out and smack them and then run away. For those of you who don't know, that's how the Fighting 5th Virginia works. We're a smaller unit. We pride ourselves on skirmishing tactics. So yeah, Conquest is great in that regard. As for the communication with the other units and saying, hey, this just happened and somebody jumps over there and does this, that happens just as much in Skirmish. Maybe not as large of a scale or as widespread or as far of a distance away, but if you get pushed out on one side of a Skirmish map and you can tell the other units that happen, they can push right in on the other side. So that's not something that's necessarily new. And on Conquest, it can be exaggerated quite a bit. If a unit completely abandons a point, and that is reported in, and you walk in and take it, that could be a big deal. But it's not necessarily something that's new. And people have been communicating and making big plays just based on those things for a long, long time. I just have to reiterate that as for the flow of Conquest games, despite using your small unit tactics and whatnot, it does largely come down to holding the majority. Holding the majority of the points and the drastic effect it has on your tickets, it kind of, in my mind, it kind of constricts your play style. You can't make these plays you want to make with your small units because you have to be focused on one of these 2 points. Otherwise, you're going to lose the game very, very quickly. You can't go off into this obscure corner of the map you might have found that has a great spot for an awesome play because you have to be focused on a point. And if the game were to be more casualty-based as opposed to just holding these points, I think small units like mine could make a lot bigger of a difference. And while we can make a difference as it stands right now, there's only so much land around those points to make use of. And I think that if it was more casualty-based, we could make a lot more important things happen than just focusing on these points.
All right. Thank you. And then Zoo, to finish off this round, you have 3 minutes. You may begin.
I think to remark on what Star said, I don't disagree. I think that the points matter a little too much. The tickets bleed rate from the points matters a little too much, right? That needs to be tweaked and optimized. Again, a fault of the fact that Conquest has not existed nearly long enough as Skirmish hasn't been refined. But at the same time, in Skirmish, where maybe it plays to that style, right, where you can always count on the fact that being in the right position and killing the enemy will get you the victory so long as you do it better than them. Matters. In Skirmish, you don't really have a choice in the matter because you're always constricted to the exact boundary of the map, and a lot of maps don't really leave a lot of choice for where to go and where to maneuver. Whereas in Conquest, sure, the points matter, but they kind of have to matter. Otherwise, how are you going to get groups and armies to kind of convalesce in the same place. You know what I mean? If I were to tell you, hey man, they're north of a forest, well, guess what? On framing fence lines, or maybe not framing fence lines, on like farmland, right? It's gonna be difficult to tell you exactly which forest that is. I need a point, right? Point of reference. The points make a good way to objectively, right, as an objective, push to a central location and denote, where you are in reference to everybody else on the map. And I would disagree that, as skirmishers, you can kind of, that's maybe less beneficial in terms of kill wise, right? Where you can go. I think as skirmishers, a 10, 15 man group or less, right? You have more choice and you can implement yourself better as skirmishers than you can in Conquest than you can in Skirmish, because you just have that freedom of movement to get in, get out, put yourself where you need to be, and join up with everybody else and focus on the point when you need to. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but in Skirmish, you often, just because of the boundaries of the map, or just because of how unbalanced the map side is, you have to be a team player. You have to join up with everybody else. You got to charge when everybody else charges. You got to defend where everybody else defends. You just don't have that freedom of choice. I find myself using scouts or other regiments using scouts in Conquest. You really don't need scouts in Skirmish because you already know where the fuck the enemy is going to be. They're going to be on or near the point or wherever they can be. God, the worst experience I have in War of Rights is not playing on a big map with like 50v50 Conquest, which is miserable, right? It's playing 150v150 on fucking downtown where the map size is like 1,000 square feet and that's it. And you have no choice but to stand in a road and shoot at the enemy 10 seconds away from their spawn. And it's constant fighting, never a break, no maneuverability, no nothing. You're just stuck. And, I feel like Conquest just gives you that liberty. And with more, it's already better now. I think it can only get better.
All right, thank you. Your 3 minutes is up. With that being said, we're moving on to our final round. Closing statements. Same order as we've done this entire time. So, Feller, you have 3 minutes for your closing statements. You may begin.
Alrighty, I'm gonna end off on a positive note here. MJ, I agree with, like I said, or like Star said. I love the maneuverability, if that's the right word, of Conquest. I like the Viet Cong aspect you gave it. I love the fast pace as well. Sometimes, I remember one night we kicked some fucking dude's ass. Right, it was over. The event started at 8 o'clock. It was over at 9 o'clock or 9:30. Um, that really is it.
You're good.
Well, like I said, I don't hate Conquest. But it has so much more potential. And yes, it is a new game, but it does need to fix it fast. Without breaking the game. And of course, it was good arguing with you folks. And once again, thank you for having me, Eagle.
Appreciate you coming on. So, now on to MJ. You have 3 minutes for your closing statements. You may begin.
Yeah, full respect to my opponents, everybody who came out. You all had really good points. You thought of things I hadn't thought of at all, like the low pop thing, a little bit of the arty thing, talking about that for a bit. Thanks, like seriously, because I like expanding my knowledge of like what people's opinions are. But in regard to the closing statement, I'm just going to reiterate: Final Push exists on Skirmish. It doesn't on Conquest. I like that. The downtown case where the maps are like significantly smaller and you can't maneuver on Skirmish, that is some of the stuff that I really hate. And as I referenced at the start with hey, the maps are larger in Conquest. Really important to me. And the VC aspect. That's why I'm on the Conquest end of things. That's all I got.
All right. Thank you. Now moving on to Star. You have 3 minutes for your closing statements. You may begin.
All right. I'm just going to go ahead and say they're wonderful, wonderful points by everyone here. It's been great to have this debate and really get the viewpoints of everyone who may not have the same opinions as me. And I'd like to reiterate that I really, really, really want Conquest to be good. But at the end of the day, this is a debate on whether or not Conquest or Skirmish is better right now. And right now, that's going to go ahead and be Skirmish. The wonderful thing about Skirmish is that you don't have to play the maps in question like Downtown. There are so many maps we can play, and that's the same with Conquest. But in Conquest, it's all going to come down to holding those 2 points, and that's the end of the story. In Skirmish, there's a multitude of different maps with a multitude of different tactics that can be used. And sure, while most of us know them by now, you don't have to do the same thing every time as opposed to holding 2 points and just holding it until the game ends. And I would like to see that changed, because if that was changed in conjunction with the better maneuverability and being able to sneak around people and really just hit them where it hurts, then Conquest could be absolutely fantastic. But right now, it's just not where it needs to be. So, I hope it gets better. I'm rooting for it, but right now Skirmish is just where it's at.
All right, thank you. And then the last person for this final round for closing statements is Zoo. You have 3 minutes for your closing statements. You may begin.
I would extremely disagree with Star. I think that there's really, even though there are good skirmish maps that aren't like Downtown, which are like River Crossing, which are just not fun to play in general, I think that most maps have become so entrenched in the meta. The winning team, assuming skill and player counts even, right, comes down to who deviates from the meta the most, right? Or the losing team is who deviates from the meta the most, right? And there are very few maps, maybe like Colquitt's Defense, where there's maybe more than one way to skin a cat, and not many more than one way, right, to go about the path to victory. Whereas Conquest, I mean, since this debate is about which one's better, and I'm speaking for myself, I gotta admit, Conquest, because there are so many ways to attack, and there's so much freedom, unlike Skirmish, right? I mean, what better place can Goon Sussy Core really thrive beyond Conquest? I mean, it's just so damn good. You get 150 guys of Sussy Brigade and, I-Core together. I mean, we're unbeatable. We're unstoppable. It's like fucking watching a perfectly good laid plan come together. And it's grand. It's amazing. You play Skirmish, it's like, I don't know, fucking, you're on like a routine schedule. And it's like, if you miss your fucking schedule, you throw the whole day off. And that's exactly what it is. You want to win on defense, you got to play a perfect game. You want to win on offense, you just need an even ratio kill number. You kill the enemy exactly the same as they kill you, at some point you'll win. Because it's supposed to be asymmetric. It's supposed to be the way it is. Doesn't leave a lot of maneuver for great thinking. It's just who makes more mistakes, who deviates from the meta. That's how you lose. That's it.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you all taking your time here. We do have one audience question, and that same question is to both sides. So we'll start with the pro skirmish side. You guys have an open table. You can say whatever you want, and then we'll do the same thing for the conquest side. So the question to both sides is, should the capture points give tickets instead of draining tickets? So yeah, skirmish people, do you want to answer that?
That is a very interesting idea. I don't know that it should, but were that to be a thing, it would have to depend on how important the casualty losses are, what the ticket counts are, and how many tickets were given back by holding these points. If it was a lot, then I would see kind of the same thing we got now, where people are just rushing to hold more points. But that would also mean that we're fighting to kill more and more and more and more, because that's how you have to drain the tickets to win the game. That would totally turn Conquest mode on its head. And that would be a very interesting thing were it to happen. But do I see it happening? No, not at all. But it would be really interesting, and I would kind of like to see how it works.
I too would also like to give my statement on that question.
Go right ahead.
A very serious statement, if I will add. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Huge.
You're welcome.
All right, pro conquest side. Question is, should the capture points give tickets instead of draining tickets?
I think if we have that happen, you're gonna get really, really, really long battles. Like in before 5-hour conquest game where one team decides to like just turtle on the point and the other team can't break it, right? It's it's really long. So I think for time concerns, I don't think the devs are going to implement it. The reason why the ticket rate, the bleed rate is currently where it's at is because they're trying to keep a somewhat similar time scale to some of these maps, right? So that what you're not just like timing out on every single one, you're actually, finishing the map by someone hitting, losing all their tickets, right? Um, I think it's an interesting idea, but it would have to be a very slow trickle unless you want 5-hour maps. So that's my opinion on that.
Zoo, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. I think that having a ticket system that ticked up for each flag you had really would just make the game last longer. It would have more games last longer, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But already you'll have, depending on tactics, skill, how the game was played, there's a good variety. I've played Conquest games where I've used up all 45 minutes, or we've drawn at last stand, or something like that. And I've had games where, really quick, just because you dominate the enemy so quickly, you capture a majority of points, you just bleed the enemy so fast, it's over. But when you have a ticket scale that ticks upwards, you focus everything more on defense and offense, and probably people will cheese that into being cowards because they want to increase their ticket game, and then you'll probably have games that end battle ready engaged, and it probably would just make things ultimately less interesting. Whereas down tickets just kind of incentivizes the game to finish as fast as possible, where over taking too much time or being too cautious.
All right, thank you. Another question we had is just for the Conquest people. Again, same format, just open table. Should the time of Conquest games increase or decrease or stay where it's at, like the 45-minute time for Conquest? Should that change or stay the same?
I would say make it an hour. Um, Make it an hour, and I think you're good. Because I think if you change the bleed rate to reflect that time, I think you solve a lot of the issues that we're having. And it's only 15 minutes longer. It's not like a huge thing. So
Zoo, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, I think Conquest should have no time limit. Honestly, I think it would be better if it were longer, but ultimately it would be best if it had no time limit. I think that a problem with, or the reason why you can need a time limit in skirmish is because, if both teams just sit and do nothing, defense wins, right? Defenders win at 0-0-0. So the only way to bleed the enemy is through attack. Whereas in Conquest, right, because the tickets by themselves, if one team has a majority, they could get no kills. At some point, they'll win. But the problem I find myself with, especially bigger maps and larger Conquest games, is that I have to act so quickly, I don't have enough time to prepare. So often, 45 minutes is just not enough time for me to navigate a map and change the odds back in my favor with good strategy and good tactics, because I really am racing against the clock. Even though there's already a method for me to make the enemy come to me, beyond time.
All right, thank you. So with that being said, that's all of our questions. Thank you to the audience for asking those questions. And thank you to all the panelists for coming on and debating this very topic. Let us know what you think about this very topic in the comment section. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good night.